Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Happy Dhanteras to all those celebrating. The Diwali festivities have begun and there's more to celebrate because rains in the Indian capital have brought the pollution levels down. We wish you all the health, happiness and prosperity in the world in the year ahead. Also tracking the big stories of the day. The war is being fought between Israel and Hamas, but increasingly it's the US that is coming under attack. Iran says the expansion of this war is quote-unquote inevitable. We'll discuss what this means. Top ministers of India and the US met in New Delhi today. The war overshadowed the conversations, but they also discussed Khalistanis in Canada. In the UK, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak may fire his Home Secretary today. We'll tell you why. In Pakistan, another unique embarrassment. They're out of paper to print passports. In India, the love affair with gold remains steady as people continue to buy tons of the yellow metal. In Spain, Pedro Sanchez is under fire for trying to secure power with the help of separatists. And loneliness kills. Even science says it. We look at some numbers so that when you meet your loved ones over the weekend, you appreciate what you have. Let's start with the headlines. US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping will meet next week in California on the 15th of November. Their first meeting since the G20 summit in Bali last year. It's an attempt to stabilize ties amid growing US-China tensions. The Philippines accuses China of quote-unquote dangerous actions in the South China Sea after a Chinese vessel fired water cannons at a Filipino boat. Manila says its vessels were recklessly harassed. Beijing accuses them of infringing on its territorial sovereignty. In Bangladesh, factories of top clothing brands have been forced to shut down. Garment workers have been protesting for higher wages. The government approved a 56% pay hike, but the workers' union rejected it. They want their income tripled. Deforestation in Brazil's Amazon is down by 22% in a year, the lowest level since 2018. Brazilian President Lula da Silva had pledged to curb destruction of the world's biggest rainforest. The Amazon is a key resource in the global fight against climate change. The United States approves the world's first vaccine for chikungunya. The mosquito-borne disease can be fatal to newborns. This year, the world has reported 440,000 chikungunya cases, including 350 deaths. And Novo Nordisk will invest $6 billion to boost the output of weight loss drugs. Sales of Ozempic and Wegovy made it the most valuable company in Europe, but the Danish drug maker has since struggled to keep up with the demand. It's day 35 of Israel's war, but the heat is on the United States. American assets and soldiers have been targeted again, this time in Iraq. At least 40 attacks have been reported so far. 56 US soldiers have been injured. Let's focus on the latest one, the latest attack. 3 separate strikes were confirmed on Thursday. The first was on a convoy. US and Iraqi troops were out on patrol near Mosul in Iraq. Their convoy was targeted with bombs. The vehicles were damaged, but no casualties. The other 2 attacks were on US bases, Al-Harir in Erbil and Ain al-Assad near Baghdad. Drones tried to hit American soldiers stationed there, but they were shot down. Now, most of these attacks have been low impact. Some have been near misses. But for how long? What if the next strike is a successful one? What if soldiers are killed? Then it's a whole different ballgame. Washington will likely respond with major force, and that is the worry. The US says Iranian proxies are behind these attacks, and officially Tehran denies this. They ask what proxies. But their foreign minister has talked about escalation. Listen to what he said. Due to the expansion of the intensity of the war against Gaza's civilian residents, expansion of the scope of the war has become inevitable. The expansion of the scope of the war has become inevitable, he says, and that's a scary assessment. Iran is one of the major players in this conflict. They think expansion is inevitable, and you cannot dismiss it as rhetoric. Iran has the resources and the clout to back it up. Just look at Yemen. It is home to an Iranian proxy group called the Houthis. On Thursday, they launched missiles at Israel. Buildings in the city of Eilat were hit.
By the grace of Allah, the operation has achieved its objectives successfully and resulted in direct hits on the specified targets, despite the enemy's silence about it. The Yemeni armed forces continue to carry out their military operations in support of the Palestinian people's just grievances until the Israeli aggression against our brothers in Gaza stops.
So to sum it up, Iranian proxies are attacking American soldiers in Iraq. Iran says a wider war is inevitable, and Yemen's Houthis are striking Israeli cities. It's a recipe for spillover. But is there a way out? Well, let's go back to the statements from Iran and the Houthis. Both had one thing in common. Iran blamed Israel's Gaza operation for the expansion risk. The Houthis said the attacks will continue until the aggression in Gaza stops. Meaning, Gaza is the key. So what's the situation there in Gaza? Israel struck the premises of 3 hospitals yesterday. Al-Shifa in Gaza City, the Indonesian hospital, and the Al-Nasser Children's Hospital. Look at the aftermath of the strikes on Al-Shifa. Thirteen people died at that hospital. Dozens more were wounded. Al-Shifa is the largest medical center in the Gaza Strip. It is treating thousands of civilians. So why is Israel targeting it? Well, their defense minister has an explanation. He says Hamas terrorists are holed up below Al-Shifa. Listen to this.
Those terrorists who are staying in the basements underneath Shifa Hospital tonight can hear the thundering sound of tank chains. The bulldozers that pound the ground, they can hear it underground. They hear it and tremble with fear.
We can't be certain of that because Israel is yet to provide any proof. But we will say one thing. Patients at Al-Shifa are caught in the crossfire and their condition is beyond horrible. Surgeries are being done without anesthetics, and that too on children.
As a father, I wished I would never have to hear my daughter cry like that. It makes my heart suffer. Her cries. I was scared that the pain would make her lose conscience, die, or that something would happen to her, because this is considered a small surgery.
There is some hope, though. Israel has agreed to humanitarian pauses. 2 evacuation corridors will be opened. They can be used to move from northern Gaza to the south, but not all the time. The pauses will last only for 4 hours every day. During this time, people can head south and aid can move north. Now, don't mistake this for a ceasefire. A ceasefire is a complete stoppage of military operations. Israel has not committed to that. In fact, they will carry out airstrikes even during the pauses. Only the corridor areas will be exempt. It's not enough to end the suffering, but it is something. We also have more clarity on Israel's objectives in Gaza. Earlier, Benjamin Netanyahu hinted at occupying the Gaza Strip, that too for an indefinite time. But now he's clarified those remarks. Prime Minister Netanyahu says he's not interested in governing Gaza.
We don't seek to govern Gaza. We don't seek to occupy it, but we seek to give it and us a better future in the entire Middle East. I've set goals. I didn't set a timetable because, it can take more time. I wish it'll take little time. But we're proceeding step by step, reducing our casualties in the process, trying to reduce and minimize civilian casualties and maximize the casualties of the Hamas terrorists.
So no timetable. Netanyahu says the war will go on as long as it takes. It's a worrying prospect because things are heating up in the West Bank as well. Israeli forces raided Jenin on Thursday. Around 18 Palestinians were killed. It was the worst violence in months. Israel is also demolishing homes in Hebron. That's another city in the West Bank. So the risk for Israel is obvious. The more they attack Gaza, the higher the risk of escalation. From the West Bank, from Yemen, from Lebanon, and from Syria. So Netanyahu may talk about a war without timetable, but he needs to wrap this up fast. New Delhi, too, is worried about the situation in West Asia. Top American lawmakers visited India. They were here to discuss bilateral issues. Inevitably, the war in West Asia came up.
I think what's happening in West Asia, Middle East, to you folks, that I think is a very big concern right now.
That's the Indian External Affairs Minister with his American counterpart, Antony Blinken. Later in the day, they were joined by the defense ministers, Rajnath Singh from India and Lloyd Austin from America. The occasion was the 2+2 dialogue. This is an annual affair. The format gets its name from its 4 participants, the defense and foreign ministers from India and the United States, hence 2+2. The first meeting happened in 2018. The practice has continued since then. Last year, America hosted this meeting, so Rajnath Singh and S. Jaishankar flew to Washington for it. This year, it was India's turn to host. And since Israel's war is intensifying, it had to figure in the talks. Blinken has been on a long tour these past few days, first across West Asia and then to the east. Before landing in New Delhi, he was in Japan and South Korea, trying to build consensus, to gain support for the American position in this war. Here in India, he praised New Delhi's support to Israel.
We appreciate the fact that from day one, India strongly condemned the attacks of October 7th. And as our joint statement makes clear, India and the United States stand with Israel against terrorism.
Although India's support is more nuanced, India has red lines and it has spelled them out. India condemns the terror attacks on Israel, but it also wants a diplomatic resolution to the crisis, direct negotiations for a 2-state solution. India has once again called for a viable state of Palestine, something that the US too advocated for recently. The Biden administration has softened its position. Israel's relentless bombing and the resulting civilian casualties have put Joe Biden on the back foot. He's coming under fire at home. Critics say he failed to keep Israel in check. India too has condemned the civilian casualties today. So West Asia was high on the agenda. But there were other talking points too, like the defense ties, the collaboration in space and technology, the Indo-Pacific, even the war in Ukraine. All of this was discussed. And that's what makes these meetings crucial, because the US is a dominant player in geopolitics, also a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and India is a rising power, also a key consensus builder on the world stage, especially after the G20 summit in September. So what India and the US think today could shape the global thinking tomorrow. And one thing that they're both thinking about is China, specifically China's activities in the region. Washington is nudging New Delhi to do more. The US wants India to take a bigger role, become a leader, a leading security provider in the Indo-Pacific.
We're integrating our industrial bases, strengthening our interoperability, and sharing cutting-edge technology. The scope of our cooperation is vast.
But India alone cannot tackle these challenges. It needs support, and America is more than willing to provide it. Today, both sides discussed a roadmap, a plan to fast-track technology cooperation in defense and co-produce important military equipment. Some areas have been identified for this, like intelligence gathering, surveillance, and munitions.
Our teams are working on the substantive outcomes. Our strategic convergence should guide us to new domains and expand the scope of collaboration. We are charting new pathways of cooperation by pursuing a stronger defense industrial engagement, easing of technology restrictions, resilient supply chains in all domains, and maritime security.
India and the US are deepening defense ties, but some differences remain, like the issue of Khalistan. Today, Antony Blinken weighed in on the Canada row. Reports say he discussed it with S. Jaishankar. They talked about the death of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Khalistani terrorist. Canada is investigating this death. It blamed India for it, but they're yet to provide proof. Today, Blinken reiterated his old demand. He said India should cooperate with Canada on the investigation. India's response? Canada should first show proof of India's role. In fact, New Delhi also raised its own concerns about the pro-Khalistan activities in Canada. Remember, Justin Trudeau has been pushing America to confront India over this. But his appeals got no traction in Washington. So expect the Americans to keep making such statements every now and then. It's part of their old strategy to keep their allies in play, but also in check. What changes faster than British weather? Their ministers. Another one could bite the dust soon, perhaps by the end of today. I'm talking about Suella Braverman. She is Britain's Home Secretary, sort of like their Home Minister. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is under pressure to fire her. And why is that? Well, if you've followed her career, that's the wrong question to ask. The right one is, why not? Because Suella Braverman is no stranger to controversies. She stumbles from one to the next. And this time, it has to do with Israel and Palestine. There's a big pro-Palestine rally scheduled for tomorrow. Thousands of people are expected to attend. Braverman did not want the rally to go ahead. She wanted to ban it, but the police disagreed. They said that there was no credible threat from this rally. So the police granted permission, but Suella Braverman decided to write about it. She wrote an article, and this is what she said in it. There is a perception that senior police officers play favorites when it comes to protesters. Speaking with current and former police officers, they have brought attention to this unfair disparity. Let me translate that for you. Suella Braverman says the police has pro-Palestine bias. Now you can see why that's a problem. We are talking about the Home Secretary here. She is publicly questioning the judgment of the British police. She's accusing them of bias, and that's not all. She did so without the Prime Minister's permission. So Tory MPs say she must go. The decision is now up to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. His office says an internal investigation is underway. Now, there are two issues to look at here. The first is internal Tory politics. The second is the politics around Palestine. Let's look at the first one first. Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman are not exactly buddies. Braverman has prime ministerial ambitions. She's been more than willing to challenge Rishi Sunak's authority. This article being the latest example. Also, her policies are not a hit. You may remember Britain's Rwanda deportation plan. It was announced last year. The plan is to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, sort of like exporting migrants. Well, that plan is being challenged in court. A verdict is expected next week. If the court strikes it down, Braverman has proposed a backup. She wants the UK to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. That's something Prime Minister Sunak is not keen on. My point is, he has reasons to fire Braverman, reasons that go beyond just Palestine. Of course, her statements on this conflict do not help. Because unlike Sunak, Braverman is more blunt.
Well, first of all, let me explain what we've seen over the last few weekends. We've seen now tens of thousands of people take to the streets following the massacre of Jewish people. To my mind, there's only one way to describe those marches. They are hate marches.
I'm sure some protesters crossed the line, but Braverman made a sweeping statement here. She says pro-Palestine marches are hate marches. It's an issue that the whole country is grappling with because the UK seems to be divided. YouGov conducted a poll recently. Look at the results. 19% Britons claim to have sympathy for Israel. 19% also had sympathy for Palestine, and 31% had sympathy for both sides. So things are pretty even. But political parties have found it hard to balance these opinions, especially the Labour Party. Their leader is Keir Starmer. He has refused to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Starmer says it would help the Hamas. But his lawmakers disagree.
It is beyond unacceptable that children are paying the ultimate price amidst the failure of political leaders in the US, in the UK and Europe to call for an immediate ceasefire and oppose violations of international law.
More than 10,000 Palestinians have been slaughtered in Israel's assault, nearly half of whom are children. It would take nearly 6 hours to read the names and ages of every child killed so far. But this horror has been given the green light by this government. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, today I tabled an amendment to the King's speech calling for an immediate ceasefire and move back by 76% of the British public.
Some of them have resigned, like Shadow Minister Imran Hussain. He wants the Labour Party to call for a ceasefire. 15 other senior Labour leaders feel the same. It's a tough situation for Keir Starmer. His party is leading in the polls. Only a miracle can keep the Tories in power after the next election. Could this rebellion be that miracle? Well, maybe not. Because to capitalise on this situation, the Tories need a united front, not a Prime Minister and a Home Secretary at war. Now let's turn our attention to Pakistan. India's neighbour is in a bit of an embarrassing situation again. This time it's about the Pakistani passport. It's one of the most useless passports in the world, ranked 4th from the bottom on the Henley Passport Index for 3 consecutive years now. Despite this, the much maligned booklet is in high demand. Pakistani people want to leave their economically battered nation, and those trying to get out legally need passports. This has led to a deluge in demand, and that demand has caused a shortage in Pakistan's passport office. They keep running out of lamination paper, so they cannot print passports fast enough. Here's a report.
What would you do if you were tasked with a critical life-saving job, knowing that what you do could help thousands of people help improve their lives and help your country through a dire situation? You'd probably take that job seriously, right? You wouldn't fall asleep at the wheel. But then you aren't a member of the Pakistani government. Pakistan is always on the edge of ruin, one bad day away from collapsing economically. So of course, the people there want to leave and make a better life for themselves outside the country.
The situation in this country is not good. The rupee is depreciating, inflation is increasing, the government is unable to manage the economy, employment opportunities are shrinking and unemployment is rising. So people are moving abroad.
To reach greener pastures legally, one document is crucial, the passport. So Pakistani people flock to try and get one. Last month, 45,000 people were reportedly applying for a passport every day. This was up from the usual 25,000 daily applicants. It seems this bump was something Pakistan hadn't accounted for, and it led the country's passport issuance to grind to a halt. The demand was so high, Pakistan didn't have enough material to print new passports, specifically lamination paper. Pakistan imports this paper from France, and it has been running out. And that's where the establishment took its eye off the ball. The surge in demand should have been no surprise. Pakistan's ministers have been tracking the exodus and even encouraging it. Almost 500,000 Pakistanis left the country in the first half of this year. And Pakistan wants this to increase. Officials have reportedly been urging Saudi Arabia alone to take in 1 million Pakistani workers a year. So clearly, Pakistan is aware of the need to print more passports. And yet, it allowed its passport office to run out of the essential lamination paper. This first happened on October 11th. Passport printing suddenly came to a halt. An order for lamination papers was then placed in a hurry. Well, as much of a hurry as can be expected with Pakistani red tape. With the delivery time and customs checks, it took Pakistan 10 days to resume printing passports. And by then, the passport application backlog had increased to 700,000. Today, people have to wait months to get their passport. Earlier, the delivery time was 10 days. Officially, it was extended to 3 weeks. But reports say that on the ground, people have no idea if and when they'll be given their golden ticket out. People who secured jobs abroad are stuck. Students are missing their college joining dates. And this will likely lead to people resorting to desperate measures. Already, many Pakistanis opt for illegal immigration. They pay people to smuggle them to Europe, either overland or through the Mediterranean, with disastrous consequences. Now, that might increase, as Pakistanis try to escape the crumbling country and its incompetent officials.
Have you heard about climate refugees? You will in the next few years. The changing climate is making some countries unlivable. The oceans are rising, cyclones are being supercharged, rainfall is either too much or too little. So what do people do? They flee. We know that conflicts create refugees. Well, climate change is doing the same now. Many countries are preparing for this eventuality, like Australia and Tuvalu. They've signed a new bilateral treaty. It says Australia will offer refuge to Tuvalu citizens affected by climate change. In other words, Canberra will take in climate refugees. How many? Up to 280 visas will be issued every year. These people can live, work and study in Australia. Prime Minister Antony Albanese called it a groundbreaking treaty. The Tuvalu Prime Minister called it a beacon of hope.
This partnership stands as a beacon of hope, signifying not just a milestone, but a giant leap forward in our joint mission to ensure regional stability, sustainability, and prosperity.
It's a big deal for Tuvalu. We are talking about a low-lying country. Its average height is 3 meters above sea level. That's just under 10 feet. So if ocean levels rise, Tuvalu is at major risk. Its islands could sink below the sea. And the government knows this. Last year, they decided to create a digital replica of their country, a Tuvalu in the metaverse. The idea was to conserve the country's history and culture. Even if the land disappears, the memory would remain. Tells you how serious this problem is, which is why Australia is offering this help, and this offer is so appealing. Tuvalu is home to more than 11,000 people. Australia is taking 280 every year. That's around 2.5% of their population. Of course, there is politics too. Tuvalu is one of the handful of countries that still recognize Taiwan. They do not have relations with Beijing, so Canberra is trying to lock in their support. But for the moment, let's keep the politics out. Tonight, let's look at the problem of climate refugees. How big is it? One study says we could have 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050. 1.2 billion. Every year, around 21 million people are being displaced by floods, by storms, by droughts and wildfires. Let me also show you the worst affected countries. In 2019, India had the most climate refugees, more than 5 million people. These are Indians displaced internally by weather events. The Philippines had 4 million. So did Bangladesh and China. Then came America with around 1 million. What exactly is driving these people out? Rising sea level is a major problem. 30 years ago, around 160 million people were at risk in coastal areas. And now it is 260 million people. 90% of them live in poor and developing nations. They do not have the money to relocate or to invest in new technology. Take Bangladesh, for example. By 2050, 17% of the country could be submerged. Imagine that, 17% of a country gone. And along with it, the homes of 20 million people. So where do they go? They become climate refugees. And for the record, Bangladesh makes up just 0.3% of global emissions. Yet they face more consequences. Same in Africa. Last year, around 7 million Africans were internally displaced. Again, the reason was climate. By 2050, half of all climate refugees could be Africans. And what is Africa's share in emissions? Just 4%. So the situation is pretty bad. The countries who triggered climate change are not as affected. It's the developing nations that are suffering. What's the solution? Well, Australia's idea is an interesting one, to take in people and give them opportunities. But not every country will be willing to do this. So do the next best thing. If you can't open your borders, open your wallet. Fund climate action in programs in affected nations. Also cut down your own emissions. It may not solve the problem, but it's a good start. Plus, we have to define who a climate refugee is. Right now, the United Nations has no definition. Even the Refugee Convention of 1951 does not include climate change. And you cannot help what you cannot define. It won't be easy to create consensus on this issue, But then again, nothing about climate action has been easy so far. Now let's talk about India's latest gold rush. In 2 days, we'll celebrate Diwali, the festival of lights, the biggest Hindu festival on the calendar. And today is Dhanteras. Among other things, it is an occasion to buy gold. Gold coins, bars, ornaments and everything in between. We buy it on this day. It's said to be auspicious. They say what you buy today will multiply. So people in India buy, and this year is no exception. India is living up to tradition. Gold traders are reporting brisk sales. We do not have the numbers yet for this year, but we know that gold prices have fallen marginally, and that is fueling demand. The sellers are optimistic. In 2022, they sold, and wait for it, 39 tons of gold during the festive season. 39 tons of gold. This year, they hope to surpass that figure. If that happens, it won't be a surprise though, because in India, there is never a reason to not buy gold. It's not just a precious metal. Gold is closely linked to our traditions, culture and financial security. We have some very interesting numbers, so listen carefully. Do you know how much gold Indian households have? A whopping 25,000 tons. How much is the stockpile worth? About $1.5 trillion. That's more than 40% of our GDP. It's the gold in your lockers. Just for the sake of comparison, the US government has the largest gold reserve, over 8,000 tons. That's what the US has, more than 8,000 tons. Indian households have 25,000 tons, more than 3 times the stock of the US government. So you could say, when it comes to gold, Indian households are richer than the American government. They're the largest holders of the metal in the world. Indians have a love affair with gold, and it refuses to end. So what explains this relationship? Like all lasting relationships, this one too is about trust. Gold is seen as a reliable investment, traditionally considered as safe as a fixed deposit in the bank. In India, companies give gold coins as bonuses. Newlyweds are gifted gold jewelry, not just for consumption, but also as an investment for their future. In fact, Indian weddings drive gold purchases. They generate about 50% of the annual gold demand. And banks have specific gold products like gold coins, even gold mutual funds. Many digital payment apps sell gold. They even offer gold as investment options like e-gold. It's as easy as installing an app. Needless to say, gold is especially popular among women. Many prefer buying gold over putting money in a bank account. According to one report, Indian women hold 11% of the world's gold, most of it in the form of jewelry. There's enormous wealth locked in these purchases. And the tradition is passed down generations, so the newer generation, the young, are also buying gold. The demand for gold bars and coins is going up. 20 years back, less than 15% of the customers bought gold in coins and bars. Today, nearly 25% of gold buyers ask for them. And the trend is not limited to physical purchases. Indians are buying gold through instruments like sovereign gold bonds. They're released by India's Reserve Bank and exchange-traded funds, or ETFs. This year, Indians bought more than 11 tons of gold in bonds. That's worth over $800 million. And last month alone, Indians poured in over $100 million in ETFs. So India's addiction to gold looks like it's here to stay. But is investing in gold worth it? Is it really as good as it sounds? What kind of returns do you get? And are they better than other investments? Let's try to answer these questions. First of all, is gold a good investment? In recent years, it has delivered results, great results. If you invested last year in gold, your return should be close to 20%. That's better than the Nifty 50, the index of India's top 50 listed companies. And what explains this high return? When inflation shot up, people turned to gold. It's a time-tested hedge against inflation. And that's why gold did well. The price shot up because the demand was high. But can it keep delivering high returns? Well, not always. Let's look at the last 10 years. Returns on gold investments have been less than 6% annually. That's the compound annual growth rate, the average rate at which your initial investment will grow every year, 6%. So in the long run, India's stock markets delivered better results because they gave a return of more than 15%. Gold gave 6%. So finally, where should you invest? Well, it depends on your risk appetite. If you prefer safe bets, go for gold. If not, turn to the stock market. Gold may not give great returns in the long run, but you can easily liquidate it. And I must add here, don't just take my advice. Listen to your financial advisor. Do your own research. Choose investments that suit you, that let you sleep peacefully at night. And have a happy Dhanteras and Diwali. For the moment, let's turn to Spain, where a deal has been struck between politicians, leaving thousands of people outraged. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has secured a return to power. He will lead the country for the third time. It should be official next week. This is despite Sanchez having lost the election. Spain held an election in July this year. Sanchez's party came in second, but he has managed to cobble up an uncomfortable coalition. His party has allied with Spain's far left, plus a host of regional parties. So they have a coalition, and this coalition will see Sanchez return to the Prime Minister's post for the third time. But he has paid a price for this deal. He had to promise amnesty. To whom? People considered separatists. And that's not sitting well with a lot of people. This political deal has led to an outpouring of anger. People have been taking to the streets of Madrid for days now. Last night, the protests turned violent. Protesters clashed with the police in Madrid. They threw fireworks and other objects at the officers. The police retaliated with rubber bullets. They charged the protesters with batons. They charged at the protesters with batons, and they arrested more than 20 people. Now, while some of the protesters turned to violence, many stayed peaceful. Yet they're angry, and they have been expressing it for days now.
The government has decided to forgive crimes that delinquents who want to break up Spain committed, because they wanted 7 votes for a legislature that they don't know how long is going to last.
That's the common criticism, that Sanchez gave amnesty in exchange for power. Let me explain. Pedro Sanchez has been trying to return to power for months now. Like I said, his party came in second in the July election. What about the party that came first? They did not have the numbers to control parliament. So Spain has been in a political deadlock for months, each side trying to gather allies to get them over the halfway mark. For Pedro Sanchez, that meant turning to the Catalan party. Now, Catalonia is a region in eastern Spain. Their main city is Barcelona. Catalonia has a distinct cultural identity and a strong sense of regional pride. Many in the region want to break away from Spain. And this has been the case for centuries. But the movement really came to a head in the year 2017. That's when the local government organized an independence referendum. Spain called it unconstitutional, but the Catalan government went ahead with it anyway. Eventually, Spain crushed the separatist forces. Hundreds of people were arrested. Some Catalan party leaders fled the country, and ties between Madrid and Barcelona have stayed sour. Which brings us back to present day and the political party behind that referendum in 2017. This party has 7 seats in Spain's parliament. Sanchez needed those numbers to secure his return to power, so he cut a deal with them. He promised them amnesty.
The amnesty bill has been agreed. Now that amnesty law needs to be seen by the rest of the political parties. That's why we are not presenting now the amnesty law, but we are presenting the political agreement, announcing we have an agreement politically and with the amnesty law.
He did not announce the details of the amnesty deal, but here's what reports say. People arrested for separatist activities will be released from prison. Charges against them will be dropped, and exiled Catalonian party leaders can return. This includes the leader behind the referendum.
As Pedro Sanchez had the government stability secured, now he'll need to earn it agreement by agreement. Without agreements, without fulfilling them, the legislator is not going anywhere. In exchange for nothing, he'd go to history's trash bin.
Public anger, an unstable political marriage of convenience, and the possibility of renewed separatism. It's a lot of sacrifice to make for a third term in power. Pedro Sanchez has his work cut out for him. Will he be able to bring stability to Spain under the current circumstances? We'll find out in the days to come. Have you heard of the term white savior complex? It's a trope used in movies and literature. It shows a white person as a messiah-like figure. This person liberates other communities, saves the non-whites, and emerges as the hero. And why are we talking about this tonight? Because of an American YouTuber called MrBeast. He has more than 200 million subscribers. So he's really famous. Recently, MrBeast decided to build 100 wells in Africa. Wells. This project will touch the lives of 500,000 people. Sounds like an act of charity, but he's being slammed for it. Why? Because his critics say he's milking poverty for views. They say it's exploitation. So what is it? White savior complex or philanthropy? Our next report tells you.
Meet MrBeast, also known as Jimmy Donaldson. He's 25 years old. He has 209 million subscribers on YouTube. As of 2023, he is the highest paid YouTuber with an estimated net worth of $500 million. But MrBeast says he has no intentions of keeping the fortune to himself. In fact, he wants to give it away. So the YouTuber turned to philanthropy. Which brings us to his latest philanthropic deed, or should I say controversy. It all started on November 4th. That's when MrBeast uploaded a 10-minute video. The caption read, "I built 100 wells in Africa." The video shows him building wells across the continent, in Cameroon, Kenya, Somalia, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. These will provide drinking water to 500,000 people. He also donated supplies to schools, built a bridge in a village, and even donated bikes to children. Sounds like a good deed, right? Or is it? Well, the internet is divided. African activists are calling it the white savior complex. They say that they have been trying to do the same thing for years, but always got stuck in paperwork and funding. However, an American YouTuber could just jet into the continent, build wells, and suddenly he gets all the attention. Meanwhile, others said it was disrespectful. They said MrBeast was enforcing Western stereotypes, the same stereotypes that say Africa is poor and desperate for handouts. Some critics even accused him of exploiting poverty, of using acts of kindness to generate views. So there was a lot of criticism, a lot of negative comments, and a lot of backlash, but they don't seem to have affected MrBeast. He says he doesn't care and that he even anticipated the backlash, but he will continue to do what he does. Now, this isn't the first time MrBeast has come under fire. His acts of philanthropy have often been a double-edged sword. Some people laud him, others say he's feeding off the poor. That said, MrBeast has built an empire on these videos and philanthropy. He once sponsored cataract surgery for 1,000 people. Another time, he bought prosthetic limbs for 2,000 amputees. Those videos are popular, and they gave him much-needed recognition and boosted his influence on YouTube and across the globe. But does that mean it's only for the views? Let's look at the facts. Yes, MrBeast makes money off these videos. That's a fact. But this money is helping people. That's also a fact. At the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. The people he helped are better off, like the villages in Africa that now have drinking water. Meanwhile, millions of his subscribers get the content that they like, and he makes money off it. Sounds like a win-win situation. But the internet remains divided. Tell us what you think.
After one MrBeast, let's talk about another kind of beast, a silent, deadly one. I'm talking about loneliness. It is as deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, as lethal as consuming 6 alcoholic drinks a day. I know the festival season is here, so you may not want to talk about loneliness, but let's just say, if you're visiting your loved ones during the holidays, you may want to make a regular habit of that, to stave off an early trip to the grave. Sounds morbid, but hey, don't shoot the messenger. I'm not saying this. A new study is. Here's what it says. When people don't socialize with friends or family, the risk of early death increases by 39%. So does the risk of death from heart disease by 53%. For those who also live alone, it gets worse. They have a 77% higher risk of early death and an even higher risk of dying from heart disease or stroke. Before I tell you why, let's cover the basics. What is loneliness? It is the gap between the level of connectedness you want and what you have. And it's not the same as being alone. It is not the same as social isolation either. Loneliness is a subjective feeling. People can have a lot of contacts, a big family, many friends, and still feel lonely. Now, loneliness is not all bad. In small doses, it is like hunger or thirst. It's a healthy sign. It shows that you're missing something. But when that is prolonged over time, it can be deadly. Here's why. The human brain has evolved to seek safety in numbers, so it views loneliness as a threat. When lonely, the brain's danger monitor goes into overdrive. It triggers a fight or flight response. Your heart rate rises, your blood sugar and pressure levels increase, in case you need more energy for a fight. More inflammatory cells are produced to repair damage. You begin to view other people as potential threats, not friends. And this creates a vicious cycle. You fear loneliness, which makes you lonelier, leading to strokes and heart disease, even dementia, inflammation, poor immunity, depression, personality disorders, and suicide. And this is not as rare as you may think. 33% of adults are lonely the world over. The highest number is in Brazil, followed by Turkey, India, Saudi Arabia, Italy, and South Africa. In fact, studies say loneliness kills far more people in the West each year than terrorists and murderers. That's an absurd statistic. But loneliness is allowed to loom large simply because of its absurdity. It is a rare and strange malady. We know what it is, we know how to cure it. It also costs relatively little, yet it's difficult to beat. Because we live in a paradoxical world. Today, the world is more connected than ever through phones, social media, Zoom calls, you name it. But this is making us more isolated. Loneliness has nearly doubled between 2012 and 2018, which coincides with the explosion of social media use. And now an entire generation is at risk. Entire new generations are at risk, in fact. Polls find that young adults are twice as likely as seniors to report loneliness. Because time with screens cannot substitute for time with humans. The steps to tackle loneliness are not grand or high-tech. One of the best strategies is to simply be old school. Eat meals together, hold parties, hang out to eat ice cream or play a sport. Get to know your neighbor. It could be anything you like. Just do it at least once a month with someone else in flesh and blood or over a call. Word of caution, playing a virtual ping pong of Instagram reels does not count. At this point, loneliness is an epidemic. So it's not just an individual problem, it's a health crisis that demands government attention. So they must get involved too. In fact, Britain did. It got a Minister of Loneliness in 2018. It sounds bizarre. A Minister of Loneliness is less obvious than a Minister of Defense or Finance. But many countries think that this post is now necessary, like Japan and Sweden. They too have ministers for loneliness or social affairs. There have been calls in Australia and other countries for this same post too. Some nations have also employed other creative measures. The UK, Sweden, Ireland and Australia have adopted what they call a chatty bench. That's what it's called, a chatty bench, a park bench where strangers can talk to each other. So the solutions may be different, but my point is quite simple. As a species, humans are not meant to be lonely. We have to form close connections, like our life depends on it, because it does. Philosophers say you die alone. What they don't tell you is that it may happen a lot sooner if you are lonely. And finally, it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. In Hawaii, a pond turned bright pink, attracting visitors from all across the island. The reason for this color change seems to be a type of bacteria. In Norway, Greenpeace activists urged the nation to stop deep-sea mining with a giant octopus. And actor Jared Leto scaled the Empire State Building in New York to announce his band's new world tour. Finally, we're taking you back in history on this day in 1969, children's TV show Sesame Street made its broadcast debut. It taught generations of children the alphabet and how to count. And it went on to become the most widely viewed children's program in the world. It's been aired in more than 120 countries since then. We leave you on that note. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend. Wishing you all a happy and safe Diwali.